Good morning everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar. Welcome to Healthy Mind, the Mind Does Matter. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania and also the coordinator of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. I'll also be your moderator for this morning's session. Before we do get started though, I'd appreciate you taking a few moments to read the following information about sessions delivered during WorkSafe Month. I'd now like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in this morning's webinar. So we've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface, so you should see something that looks like this on your computer screen in the upper right corner. You're most likely listening in using your computer speaker system by default. However, if you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these questions and address them during the presentation and also at the end. We are also recording webinars that we have run during WorkSafe Tasmania Month, and will progressively make those webinars available at the end of the month, which does conclude on Friday. And lastly, before you do leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate you taking a few moments to complete that survey, providing us with your feedback about your webinar experience and also about the presentation. So it is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Tamika Carey from IPAR Occupational Rehabilitation Services, to present this morning's webinar, Welcome to Healthy Mind, the Mind Does Matter. Welcome, Tamika.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. My name's Tamika. I'm an occupational therapist based in Launceston. So for those of you who don't know what an occupational therapist is, we work in a variety of healthcare backgrounds, basically helping people get back to whatever meaningful activity they need to or would like to. So I work specifically in return to work. We work with people who've had both physical and psychological injuries to assist them return to either their pre-injury employment, or if for any reason that's not possible, we can assist them return to new employment. Now, IPAR also work in the injury prevention area, so we do manual handling training throughout Australia. And more recently, we've started doing presentations such as this one, which is psychological prevention. The reason for this is that there's been an increase in psychological injuries in the work cover area, and also a general increase in people taking kind of stress leave days and sick leave due to psychological illness or injury. So throughout this presentation, it is normally presented in quite an interactive way. So if you do have any questions at any time, feel free to shoot them through. Also, if you have any examples as we're going through, feel free to send those through as well. And as we go through the presentation, I'll try and give you some examples from when I've previously done the presentation face-to-face with people, because I think they really help to understand the concepts. So, looking at today's learning objectives, the goal of this session is to help define stress and understand the relevant risk factors associated with stress, understand your personal signs and symptoms of stress and how to recognise these when they appear, demonstrating how to practically apply the stress reduction principles that we'll go through to help you cope with stress, and also talk about strategies to help maintain a work-life balance. Finally, we'll be having a look at how to have a conversation about stress too, because it's important that you're obviously able to be thinking about not only your own stress, but also that of the people around you, particularly your family, friends and colleagues. So what's the point of this? So we're looking specifically at stress, but also specific mental health conditions, looking at the risk factors, signs and symptoms, and also practical tips, including how to exercise your mind and body. So what is stress? It's different for everyone, but generally we see it being described as an overall feeling of being overwhelmed, tense and moody. So you probably would often hear people say things like, gee, I feel stressed, or I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Some people have the opposite kind of reaction, nothing affects me, I can just cope with anything. So stress can also cause us to procrastinate, and it can also have physical symptoms such as headaches. So as well as being negative though, stress can motivate us to help get tasks done. So it can help us to perform. I know that when I have a long to-do list, if I have a deadline to finish a project by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, although I might feel really stressed, it might motivate me just to get in and get it done. But when stress interferes with our ability to cope with our normal life, that's when it can become harmful. In little bits, stress can help to build resilience. It helps us learn coping strategies and helps us to achieve mental fitness. So a little bit of stress is good for us, but we need to learn how to know when it tips us over the edge and we're in danger of experiencing too much stress. And that's what today's session will hopefully help you to identify, when you can intervene early to build resilience, learn coping strategies and achieve that mental fitness before experiencing the negative impacts of too much stress. So the most common cause of mental health condition is mental stress, and mental stress can influence how you feel, think, behave, interact, and also how our bodies function. So it really impacts on our whole lives. So looking at common mental health conditions, the number of people who've experienced a mental health disorder in the last 12 months is 20%, or 1 in 5 people. If you're thinking of that in terms of the people around you, we're looking at most likely one person in your family, one person in your close group of friends, or one person in your team at work has most likely had a mental health disorder in the last 12 months. And the number of people who experience a mental health disorder at some times in their lives is nearly 50%. So you've almost got a 50% chance yourself of experiencing a mental health disorder throughout your lifespan. And of those mental health disorders, anxiety and depression are by far the most common psychological disorders that are experienced by Australian workers. So what are your chances of returning to the workplace once you're off sick? So I often ask groups this question. Working in the return to work sector, I can let you know that there is many, many different things that affect someone's capacity to return to work. And quite often examples that I get given are things like the level of support that you might have at the workplace, also the level of support that you might have at home. Another thing that people commonly bring up is the type of injury that you've had and whether any risk of that reoccurring has been removed. But evidence suggests that the most the most statistical thing that affects someone's capacity to return to work is actually the amount of time that they've been off work. So you see here that if someone has been off for 20 days, they've got about a 70% chance of returning to work. And if someone's been off for 70 days, they have about a 35% chance of returning to work. So if you have a think about why that might be, why might someone take longer to return to work if they've been off work? So there's a number of things that impact on this. One thing is that if you have a think about yourself when you've been off work for annual leave or for a holiday, how do you feel when you set your alarm before you go back to that first day back at work after 2 weeks off? You feel a little bit stressed, you feel like your body clock is out of whack, you're in holiday mode, you might feel a little bit anxious about getting back to work, you might feel as though you've got hundreds of emails to get through from when you've been away. And so it's not really a very nice feeling. If you can imagine being off work for 70 days, not only have you not been in the workplace to complete your normal tasks, but you've also potentially been at home recovering from an injury. You've not been very productive with your time. You've not been interacting socially with other people as much as you may perhaps have been. You might have been spending a lot of time procrastinating. Another thing that we see that's quite common as well is if someone's had a purely physical injury, so for example, slipped a disc in their back or required surgery for a knee injury, if they've been off work, creeping up to this kind of 45 to 70 days off work, you can often see secondary psychological conditions starting to occur. And again, someone is susceptible to that. You've got them off work, not interacting socially. They're not really being potentially very productive with their time because they are incapacitated from undertaking their pre-injury tasks. So waking up each day and not having that meaning or purpose to get through tasks throughout the day can have a real effect on your psychological health as well as your physical health. So having a look at the most common psychological disorders, first of all, anxiety. So I'm sure that everyone's heard of anxiety or may have experienced or know someone who's experienced it at some time in their lives. So as with many mental health disorders, anxiety is thought to be the result of unhealthy maturation of a process developed through evolution. So I like to think of anxiety in the fight or flight example. You've probably heard of that response, and you know that it's our body's way of preparing to deal with a threatening situation, either through directly confronting the threat or fleeing from it. So to help us prepare for one of these reactions, our body automatically reacts to the perceived threat through heightening of senses. So that's things like tensing of muscles, increase of heart rate, and increased breathing. So if, for example, you were confronted by a man-eating animal, these reactions can be really helpful and they can be resources that you use to help save yourself. But if you're constantly experiencing this reaction to stress over a prolonged period of time, it can be detrimental to your health and well-being. And it also has the capacity to impact on your daily functioning. So as healthcare professionals, we like to look at disorders in a number of quadrants when considering how they impact on our daily functioning. So we have a look at how they make us think, feel, behave, and what our body's physical reaction is. So as you can see for anxiety, feelings are usually those of worry, failure, or powerlessness. In relation to our thinking, you might have difficulty concentrating, making decisions, remembering things, or even have racing thoughts. Our bodies will react with an increased heart rate, shortness of breath, fatigue, or a clenched jaw. And we might act behaviourally by abusing drugs or alcohol, withdrawing from social connections, or increasing smoking. So I think it's important, as with every health condition that we look at, to consider that it affects people really differently. So I think of the example of, for example, in the behavioural section here, looking at substance abuse, it might be that two people might be experiencing similar feelings of anxiety when attending a social event. One person might react by using downing a few glasses of wine as a coping mechanism to help relieve some of their symptoms of anxiety and interact better in that party. Other people might have the experience of more of that kind of flight response. So they might arrive at the party, stand in the background for 20 minutes or so, and then leave really early. So it is important to think that, you know, two people experiencing the exact same symptoms in the exact same scenario can have completely different reactions, and that's very normal. So similar, looking at depression. So there's probably been a time for all of us when we've said, I'm depressed, but depression is more than just feeling sad. Depression is a severe or prolonged feeling of despondency and sadness which significantly impacts a person's ability to effectively function in a broad range of domains. So depression is associated with the most increased absenteeism, withdrawal and disengagement from the workplace. And I think it's important to remember that absenteeism and disengagement, not just looking at it from a workplace perspective, because it's pretty obvious when someone starts to withdraw from the workplace. You know, there's generally a record of attendance for work, so you know, it is very obvious when you do stop attending that. Quite often we'll see people start to disengage socially, so they might not be attending events, they might not be participating in previously enjoyed activities. And, you know, that's quite often an early warning sign before you might notice anything in the workplace. Another person, when I've presented this, has given a really good example that although people can physically be at the workplace, they might, you know, be absent essentially in that they're not very productive, not getting much done. They're turning up, but not interacting with colleagues and things like that. So it's important to remember that that disengagement doesn't just mean not attending at all. It can mean, you know, just general disengagement and lack of communication. So at least 7% of employees in an organisation will experience depression in any 1 year, and it does have the most negative impact of all mental health conditions on work performance. So again, we can have a look at the different domains that depression affects in how we feel, think, behave, and how our bodies function. So you tend to see feelings of low mood, loss of interest and motivation, a lack of confidence. People with depression often report thinking thoughts about being a failure, being worthless or at fault. Depression impacts on a person's ability to sleep, eat and get day-to-day tasks on. So it says on there significant weight loss. I would say it can also impact on significant weight gain depending on the person. Your psychomotor agitation, which is being really flinchy or touchy, or similarly psychomotor retardation, which is where everything's slowed down. Looking at how we behave, it can affect, obviously, as we've said, your appetite, sleep problems. So quite often you might see people having difficulty falling asleep, frequent waking in the evening. And I think as well, sleep obviously has a big impact on our functions. And when your sleep patterns are irregular, it can affect your motivation to get out of bed. If you're already having feelings of loss of motivation and that's compounded by a lack of sleep, then you're going to be less motivated again to get out of bed and get things done. It can also cause physical agitation or headaches. Looking back at what you experience, those are really big ones as well. And as we said, with behave, not getting things done at work. So you know, the absenteeism isn't necessarily not physically being there. So what affects you? I quite often ask the groups that I'm presenting to have a think about what affects them and what might cause stress in their lives. So I think it's important just to take a moment, if you're listening to this webinar with a group of people, maybe have a quick chat about what affects you, or the people around you. And I guess it's, you know, we know that mental illness is debilitating and extremely common, and we know that too much stress can lead to mental illness. So if we're able to identify what causes us stress, it can help us cope with those stresses. It could be anything really. Some of the most common causes of stress that we see on a day-to-day basis are these ones that I'm just bringing up now. So work pressure or overload is definitely a big one. Rapidly changing work environments. So that is, you know, if you are given a new role to take on, or quite often there'll be changes in policies and procedures. I find people that are, you know, work for organisations where essentially things are out of their control, can find it really difficult to adapt and find that quite stressful. Job insecurity can be quite stressful, particularly when an organisation has multiple redundancies and people are wondering if their job is secure or not. That can be very stressful. Interpersonal conflict in the workplace, and obviously interpersonal conflict outside of the workplace as well, so dealing with family members or friends. Financial strain, health and medical issues, and those are health and medical issues for yourself and also for people around you, friends and family. Relationship problems, planning a marriage, a baby or a new career direction, traumatic events and competing life demands. So generally people tell me that kids are quite stressful. I've had a few people that have gotten married, and I know the build up to their weddings has been very stressful as well, so it's not always a negative event that causes the stress. And I think the competing life demands is a big one as well, because that's something that's a little bit harder to identify. You might not you know, be able to pinpoint one thing that's causing you stress, but it might be that work's really busy, so you're working a little bit of overtime. You know, hubby's saying to you, oh, I've had to do all the extra runs for the kids because you haven't been home to do it. Your friends are saying, I feel like I haven't seen you in weeks. And just that feeling of being torn from multiple directions can be stressful in itself. Any one of these areas is, if sufficiently severe, can explain the onset of stress or mental illness, or it might be a combination of less severe factors in several areas that can explain the condition. So again, you might not be able to pinpoint the one stressor that's affecting you, but you might be feeling a little bit stressed in multiple of these areas, which all adds up.
Just a question that has come through just in regards to the stresses that you've mentioned, Tamika. If someone is experiencing these, stresses, and what's the best way for them to get some help, particularly if they're feeling them but not necessarily recognising them as potential depression?
Yeah, definitely. So we will go through some potential coping strategies and things later on in the presentation. I guess probably the first part of this is recognising that you are stressed and being able to sit down and reflect and think about what it might be that's stressing you. So again, just being aware that there's these areas, and this definitely isn't a comprehensive list. There's many other things that might cause stress in your life, but being aware that you are feeling stressed, being able to identify that, and being able to sit back and reflect on what it is that's stressing you is the first step. And then just in a little while, we'll have a look at how to cope with that as well. So very good question though. So this activity here, having a look at your common stresses, is another way to help identify what is potentially stressing you. So this activity, obviously, again, we're putting it into domains: work, family, social and personal development. And I think the important thing to note when you're looking at this is the arrows in the middle of the diagram there. So basically what that is saying is that stress has the potential to overflow in other domains of your life. So for example, if I'm feeling really stressed at work, if I've got a big project that's due to be completed and I don't feel as though I'm going to reach that completion point by my due date, I'm getting criticism from colleagues or from potential customers about not reaching that due date, then I'm really, really stressed at work. Then when I go home, my partner says to me, how was your day at work? And I might be really snappy because one of my symptoms of stress is that I get agitated and I have a very low tolerance for, to deal with anything. So then I snap at my partner. If there was any underlying issues there, obviously then that can cause a conflict within that relationship. Then I get a phone call from one of my friends that night saying, do you want to come out for a coffee tomorrow or on the weekend? It'll be really nice to catch up. And my response might be, no, I'm really stressed at work. Now I'm fighting with my partner. I just really don't want to see anyone. I don't want to go out. So that one thing, being stressed at work, having a big project overdue, has now had a flow-on effect and affected multiple aspects of my life. And again, we're looking at stress as in I've been able to pinpoint that one stressor. Now I've got multiple stressors which I have to deal with. So again, when you're feeling stressed, I think it is important to sit back and think, right, what is stressing me? What segments can I put that stress into? Is it work, family, social, or personal development? But then also consider, has it affected any other parts of my life? And also, does it have the potential to affect any other parts of my life? So having a look at the signs of stress, I'm just going to pop all of these up on the one slide. So obviously we've said that stress has the potential to affect both physically, emotionally and cognitively. And again, it's different for everyone, and this list you might find that you experience some of these or many of these. It will be different for everyone. Some common ones that I've had a chat to people about is some people have told me when they feel stressed they get just like a red rash over their skin, which resolves when they're not feeling stressed anymore. You get your fight or flight kind of reaction. So your fight, that's kind of your rapid pulse, heart pounding, shortness of breath, trembling, or you might get that kind of flight response as well, where you have that fatigue, wanting to remove yourself from the situation. Emotionally, you've got a whole spectrum of emotional responses, so from things like nervousness and anxiety to being moody, to being easy to anger, feeling negative. And cognitively, you've got things like forgetfulness, poor concentration, errors in judgment, inability to think clearly. And I think cognitively as well, we don't often step back and think about how it's affecting us cognitively, because physically, we're obviously going to note how it affects us physically because there's potentially something that you can see happening. Emotionally, quite often people around you will be able to reflect on how you're handling things emotionally. But cognitively, we often don't realise, and I think it's important to note that, because if, for example, my work example again, I've got my projects that I don't feel like I'm going to finish in time. If I'm feeling really, really stressed and trying to sit in front of my computer and just get this report finished, I might be having poor concentration, which is going to affect my ability to complete the report. I mightn't be thinking clearly. I might have increased error in judgment, or slowing of the thought process. So if I don't do anything to manage my stress, it might be counterproductive to me completing the task that I have set. So it is a more tricky one to identify, the cognitive effects of stress, but it is just as important as the other ones to be able to note for yourself how it affects you. So again, having a think about what do you experience when you're feeling stressed, and looking at the domains, again, physical, emotional and cognitive, and there's also an additional one in there, behavioural. So just for an example, I have a friend who's a nurse who has a very stressful job, and obviously varying degrees of stress in her life. Behaviourally, when she is really stressed at work, it really reflects in her behaviour because she just gets really snappy. And, you know, we kind of all know, right, when she gets snappy, she's just a little bit stressed. That's okay. Let's help her deal with that stress. Let's have a chat about what's happening at work so that we can try and come up with some solutions to help her. And again, you know, having a think about what you experience when you're stressed is important. It's also important to note how the people around you handle stress and how it affects them. Because again, you know, you might have colleagues who get a bit snappy or a bit agitated when they're stressed. And if you're able to identify, right, this person's stressed, then you might be able to help do something about it. You might be able to have a conversation with them about it. You know, similarly, if you're in a management position, if you can note, you know, how the people in your team experience stress, then you might be able to better identify when they're stressed, because you know, they themselves might not be able to sit back and notice that subjectively, but you looking from the outside might be able to notice and help to intervene to make things better. So how do we help to manage stress? So one of the important things is building a healthy mind and body. So how do you build a healthy body? I'm hoping that everyone has something that instantly pops to mind with how to build a healthy body. It's a pretty easy one, I would think. The first thing to build a healthy body is regular physical activity. And the Mayo Clinic have come up with 7 benefits of physical activity. So obviously it helps to control weight. It can combat health conditions and diseases. It improves mood, boosts energy, promotes better sleep, improves physical intimacy, and can be fun. So I think a lot of people that I talk to use physical activity as a way to de-stress or unwind. Again, everybody's really different, so some people might not find it as helpful. But a lot of people will say that they go to the gym to unwind after a stressful day at work, or go for a walk to help de-stress at the end of a long day. So it's important to bear this in mind, obviously for a physical health perspective, but also from a psychological health perspective. If somebody's on a GP mental health plan, for example, quite often they will include physical activity as part of the therapy, because studies have shown that increased physical activity does assist with improving mental health as well. Hopefully you were also able to identify the other thing that affects, helps to build a healthy body, which is maintaining a balanced diet. So obviously it's an important step towards a healthy lifestyle. It boosts immunity, which I think is an important one to bear in mind, because when we're feeling stressed, we actually have a lower immune system. So you've probably heard people say before, I've had a really stressful week at work and now I've got a cold sore, or I had a runny nose and the kids have been stressing me out and now I've developed a full-blown cold. So, you know, stress, because of the way it physically and psychologically manifests, it does affect our immune system. So that means that when we are feeling stressed, and just generally as well, it's important to maintain a healthy diet to make sure that you're getting all the essential nutrients and things you need to build a healthy immune system. It also helps to protect against certain types of diseases, contributes to an adequate body weight. And I really like this last point, enriches life by experimenting with different foods from different cultures, origins, or different ways to prepare food. So I think for myself, food's a very social thing. So I use food to assist with my, managing my healthy mind by, for example, going out for a meal with friends, maintaining those social contacts. If I go home to my parents' house to visit them, we'll sit around the table and have a meal together. And the interactions that we have whilst having that meal are probably more quality interactions than if we weren't doing that, because the TV would be on in the background, there'd be some sort of sport on, you wouldn't have people's full attention. So I think foods are really important in maintaining a healthy mind, not just from a nutritional perspective, but also because of the social benefits that it can have, and just helping to, if you are the person who cooks in the home, cooking a beautiful meal for your family can give you a really good feeling of self-worth and accomplishment. Cooking something nice to take to work and having your colleagues tell you that it was delicious can really, I guess, boost positivity and generally just make you feel good about yourself. So moving on from building a healthy body and looking specifically at how do you build a healthy mind. So this is something that a lot of people that I work with have trouble answering. If I was to say to you, what do you do to build a healthy body? Most of you would be able to give me an example of some sort of exercise they do, eating fruit and veggies, things like that. But if I was to say to you, what do you do on a daily or weekly basis to maintain good psychological health? I generally have a couple of people that have got a good routine in place to build a healthy mind, but most people that I work with don't really have an answer to this question. So there obviously is some things that we can do, things like yoga, meditation, which are formal kind of ways to help with mindfulness. General mindfulness strategies, there's things like the adult colouring books have become really popular lately, and other mindfulness strategies, which again there's hundreds of them, and it's about finding what is right for you. Because as with exercise, different people enjoy doing different types of exercise, just as they enjoy doing different types of mindfulness. But again, and the purpose of this presentation really is to have a think about, do you do anything to maintain your psychological health? And if the answer is no, what can you do to build a healthy mind? So one way that we look at building a healthy mind is improving our resilience. So resilience is about being mentally strong, and it's founded on the idea of positive psychology. So it's looking at individuals who cope well and experience significantly positive well-being, and it's one of the fastest growth areas in psychological research and practice at the moment. So looking specifically at the concept of resilience and what attributes resilient individuals tend to demonstrate, they're listed here. So being proactive is better than being reactive. So again, it's about having coping strategies in place so that when you do start to feel stressed, you can A, identify what's stressing you and how it's affecting you, and then B, utilise strategies to help manage that stress. The mindset of being resilient allows us to bounce back from setbacks, because inevitably we have to understand that there's going to be setbacks in life, there's going to be traumatic events and things that cause us to be really, really stressed. And it's about acknowledging, right, that's going to happen at some point. Let's put some strategies in place to, again, help us bounce back from that, and allows us to manage the stresses of life and change to new ways of working and living when the old way is no longer functional. So human beings are ridiculously habitual. We tend to get into routines and habits and be very reluctant to change those. Just an example of that is that we do a lot of assessments and things for people who are returning to work, and I would say probably 1 in every 3 we can give an example, like walking into the office and saying, right, why do you have the 15 kilo boxes on the top shelf and the 1 kilo boxes on the bottom shelf? And people will say something like, oh, we've just always done it that way. People do that with their psychological health as well, in that they get stuck in a routine. You might get stuck in the routine, for example, of working late every day and missing out on that family meal. And just because that's the way that you've been doing it for a while, you need to reflect, is that the best way that you could be doing things? Resilience helps to protect us against the impacts of stress, and it also helps us to recover when we are recovering from a significant stressor. So one person who's done a lot of research in this area is Seligman. He's developed the wellbeing theory, which has 5 measurable elements for having a healthy mind and increasing psychological well-being. So the first one of those is experiencing positive emotion or having a pleasant life. So it doesn't propose that happiness is about experiencing pleasure at all times, but for people who flourish, they need to focus on positive ways of getting more out of life. It's about looking at engagement. Did time stop for you? So we'll have a bit of a chat about that in more depth in a moment. Building positive relationships with other people, having meaning and purpose. So again, that's that belonging to and serving something that's bigger than yourself. So thinking of the groups that you belong to, your family group, your friend group, your work team. You might belong to a sporting club, or you might be part of a church group. And the last one is probably more of a selfish one, but ensuring that you feel like you're accomplishing things. So it's often pursued for its own sake, even when it brings no positive emotions. And I think that's really important, that you'll often see in resilient individuals, that kind of being able to give yourself a pat on the back for doing a good job. So, you know, even my example before of baking a beautiful meal for your family, conquering a new recipe that you've never cooked before, being able to actually say, yep, I did a good job with that, definitely helps to increase your psychological well-being. Another theorist, Barbara Fredrickson, has also looked at ways that people can improve their resilience and effectively deal with stress. So she's developed the broaden and build theory, which states that positive emotions broaden an individual's momentary thought action repertoire. Enjoy sparks the urge to play, and interest sparks the urge to explore. So she says that positive emotions promote discovery of novel and creative actions, ideas and social bonds, which in turn build that individual's personal resources, ranging from physical and intellectual resources to social and psychological resources. She also talks about the Lasada ratio, which is more positive thoughts than negative thoughts help to build social capital. And highly resilient individuals have shown to experience positive emotions even in the midst of stressful events. So they're more likely to succeed in rebounding from these events. And in this context, they use their positive emotions as a coping strategy. So someone gave me a really good example of this in one of my presentations of someone who, for example, is a singer. So the first performance they do, they might be feeling really, really stressed. They might be feeling really anxious. and when they go out to perform, they might get through the whole song, not really enjoy it though because they are feeling really stressed. Over time, as they build their resilience through experiencing this stress and also develop coping strategies, so for example, they might listen to soothing music before their performance. They might undertake some deep breathing before they go out and sing. Even though they might feel a little bit stressed and anxious before every performance, once they've developed these coping strategies, they're able to experience positive emotions even while performing in this potentially stressful event. So the next thing that we're looking at was kind of to do with point 2 of Martin Seligman's theory, looking at being able to lose time and having a state of joy, creativity and total involvement. So the gentleman who's developed this concept, I can't pronounce his surname unfortunately, but it is listed there. He's developed the concept of flow. So if you have a look at the table there, on the bottom level there, you've got skill level. If you've got a high skill level and the task that you're undertaking is highly challenging, that's when you can develop this feeling of flow. So flow is characterized by being completely absorbed in the task that you're performing so that you lose track of time. You didn't notice other distractions and you have a high amount of satisfaction and pleasure from completing the task. So you often hear people describe it as being in the zone. And people are most likely to experience this feeling of flow when they have the skills to perform a highly challenging task. So you can see from the graph that at different challenge and skill levels, we tend to experience different emotions. And if a task lacks challenge and it doesn't require us to have a high skill level, then we can experience apathy. If the task involves a challenge beyond our skill level, that's when we can experience anxiety. However, when both the challenge and skill levels are high, obviously we said that's when flow is achieved. So can you have a think about when is a time that you've experienced that feeling of flow? When have you found yourself in a situation where you've lost track of time? So for example, working on a project and the next thing you realise you've missed lunch or it's already time to go home for the day. And you have that where has time gone kind of feeling. The state of being in the zone and being completely involved in the task and you're unable to be distracted. So again, I think it's important to make sure that we are having experiences where we get to that point of experiencing flow, and that if we are in that state of feeling anxiety, having a think about what's happening for me to experience that. Is my skill level in this task too low? Is the challenge level too high? And being able to reflect on, you know, which thing might be something that you can change. So can you change the challenge level of the task? Can you increase the time frame to do this task so that you have time to complete it, therefore reducing the challenge level and reducing your levels of anxiety? Or can you upskill yourself so that you don't experience anxiety when trying to undertake this task? So looking at practical tips to enhance psychological well-being. So looking at enhancing our own well-being by building strong networks or relationships around us. So it's important to have family, friends, co-workers, people in our lives that we can use to seek support. And also the ability to trust and willingness to share new experiences. So quality of relationships is generally more important than the quantity, and it's beneficial for your mental health to have a few good friends who you know you can trust and share experiences with, rather than a lot of friends who you don't really share things with. Another little task that we use to have a look at psychological well-being is having a think about your beliefs and values. So if I'm reflecting on what my beliefs and values are, and then thinking about, do I actually live to those values? So just as an example, if I say that I value my family above all else, and I think about my actions over the last month when I've seen my parents once, I could have gone around to visit them a couple of other times, but I stayed late at work. I could have visited them a couple of times, but I was really tired, so I went home and watched TV instead. My dad asked me to help him last weekend, but I said I couldn't because I wanted to go out with my friends. Then am I really living consistently by what my values are? And I don't think that anyone really gets that 10 out of 10 I'm living, oh sorry, that 0 out of 10 I'm living fully by my values, because I think that, you know, we obviously have financial obligations and things that are out of our control. But again, it's about thinking about, what do I value most in life, and am I living consistently to do that, or am I working 50 hours a week and not spending time with my friends or my family, or participating in the sport that's important to me. So focusing on achievements can also help to enhance psychological well-being. So again, this is about being able to give yourself a pat on the back, identify something that you've done really well, and setting goals and rewarding yourself as well. So again, just trying to find that feeling of achievement. Minimizing negative self-talk, so being mindful of unhelpful thinking and talking positively, and being solution-focused. So I think this is really important in that, you know, sometimes it can be really good to have a rant and get something off your chest. But if you are going to be speaking negatively, what's the point of speaking negatively if you're not going to be trying to come up with a solution? Speaking negatively can bring down other people around you. It makes your mood more negative, and you know, it's not helpful. So it's about trying to be positive. If something's outside of your control and you can't find a solution for it, it might be the case that you get it off your chest and you say, right, I'm not going to think about that for another week. I'll come back to it and reassess if I can find a solution. We find that people that are really stressed tend to be very negative and go over and over again the negative scenarios in their mind. So someone asked earlier about how we can deal with stress. So mindfulness is a strategy that we use to help cope with stress. It involves acceptance of our thoughts and emotions rather than resistance. So I think of this, for example, from my office-based days. If I'm feeling really stressed, I can find that I'm staring at my computer screen, I'm procrastinating, I'm not being very productive. So using a simple mindfulness strategy, which might take 2 minutes, can then mean I can get back onto the task and help to you know, improve my productivity essentially. So the example here is putting your worries on a leaf. So basically, sitting at your desk, close your eyes and think of a beautiful stream with just a leaf sitting on it, floating down the stream. As each leaf goes past, you place a thought on it and watch it slowly disappear down the stream. So it might be, I'm not doing this report correctly, let it float down the stream. I don't know if I'm going to get this done on time, let it float down the stream. And some people might think, am I doing this right? Why are we doing this? And again, this is okay. It's something that, you know, you've got to find a mindfulness strategy that works for you. Some people find that if mindfulness strategies like imaging and breathing techniques and things don't work for them, that, you know, I say even getting away from your desk and going for a lap around the block can be helpful. Getting away from your workspace and going into the lunchroom and having a chat with a colleague for 5 minutes about what you're going to do on the weekend can also be helpful. It's basically, what can you do to take your mind off the task, basically reset, and then come back feeling fresh, feeling de-stressed to complete that task. So Maintaining a healthy life means continuing with your usual activities. That includes work, social and family. Making sure that you make time to do the things that you enjoy. Seeking support and asking yourself, are you okay? So asking yourself, are you okay, is really important. It's also important to be able to talk about stress with other people. So the 4 steps that we use to talk about stress, the first thing is asking the question. I find that a really simple question. I've noticed that you're not yourself at the moment, or I've noticed that you seem quite stressed. Is everything okay? Is a really good one. If the person doesn't want to speak to you, they'll say, yeah, no, I'm fine, thanks for asking. And you know that that's, where you stop. But I think just asking the question can sometimes make people feel really good that, right, they've noticed that I'm feeling stressed. And that acknowledgement can be a really good thing. If someone is willing to disclose to you that, yes, I'm feeling really stressed at the moment, it's really important to listen and ask questions. So how is this affecting you? Do you know where to seek help? Helping them to seek help is important too. I find a lot of people might know where to seek help, but they just haven't gone about it yet. And obviously, if they don't know where to seek help, hopefully you can give them a point in the right direction. And then finally, following up. So following up after that conversation, what's the next step for you? How did you go with seeking help? Again, just making sure that you're touching base. So this activity, role play, essentially goes through different ways that we can have a conversation. So step 1, asking the question. So you can ask things like, I've noticed that you're a bit stressed. Is everything okay? You don't seem like yourself. Is everything all right? Step number 2 was having that conversation. So asking questions about what have you done to help this situation? What do you think might help you? How else is it affecting you? Step 3, do you know where you can get help, or have you spoken to anyone about this before? So pointing them in the right direction to seek help. And step 4 is that follow-up phase. So how are things? Did you end up going to that appointment or speaking to that person? What's the next step, or what did they recommend for you? So I guess today the point is just to get you thinking about stress and how it might affect you. Now that you think back, you might be able to reflect on some strategies that you do use to maintain a healthy mind, but you just don't consciously do it. So things like going for a walk, removing yourself from your desk every hour to get up and have a walk around, and then coming back to look at a task with a fresh set of eyes. But I think it's important to really notice what strategies do work for you. So then when you are feeling really stressed and under pressure, you've got some things in your tool bag that you can use to help you to cope. And it's also good to try out new strategies. So I'll put up some websites in a minute that have got some really good mindfulness techniques and things on them that you can utilise as well. So in summary, we're looking at stress as an overall feeling of being overwhelmed, tense and moody. Stress can be good, but when it interferes with our ability to continue with normal life, that's when it becomes harmful. Mental stress affects our psychological and physiological systems. And looking at Martin Seligman's theory as well, maintaining positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment can help to build a healthy mind. And it's important to share your experiences and be mindful of what other people are feeling stressed about and what they're displaying when they're stressed as well, so that you can have a conversation about it. So I've got a list of websites here for where to seek help. Obviously this presentation is specifically around helping to manage stress. If you do feel as though your stress is developing into potentially a psychological condition, it's very important that you speak to someone, and GPs can be fantastic at helping with mental health. They can do referrals to psychologists under Medicare funding, and also just be a really good avenue to talk to. Lifeline has a phone line there. Beyond Blue has some really fantastic resources on their website if you want some general information. They also have a phone line, and they've recently started doing an internet chat line where you can do an online chat if you're feeling really stressed rather than phoning in. And these ones on here, the Mood Gym and the National E-Therapy Centre, are just some really good resources to look for mindfulness techniques and different ways of coping with stress. And again, you know, there's no harm in trying a simple mindfulness technique that might take 2 minutes out of your day. If you don't find it helpful, that's fine, but you might find that it is a really good way to de-stress and unwind. So before we conclude the presentation, if anyone has any questions, or Steph, if you've had anyone send through any questions, feel free to speak up.
Sorry about that slight tech issue. No, thank you very much, Tamika, for your webinar today. Welcome to Healthy Mind. The mind does matter. We will begin to answer any questions that people have submitted during the presentation, so there is still time if anyone does want to type in a question into the questions pane on the control panel on the right-hand side. So I guess, Tamika, you were talking about, I guess, having a conversation, and one of the questions that has come through is that there is sometimes women probably tend to like to open up a little bit easier than men. So how do you go about having a conversation with a man if you can see they're experiencing obviously stresses or possibly depression?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I do agree with that that comment, and I guess again it's different for each person. I think the most important thing is keeping it relevant and keeping asking those questions. I actually worked with a gentleman who was returning to work, and after the process was over, he said to me, he was off work for a month, and he just got a phone call once a week from his boss to say, how are you going? How are you feeling? Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling under pressure? And he said to me later on, I was feeling stressed. I didn't really want to talk about it with work, but just having someone acknowledge that what you're going through is really stressful, or what you're doing is really stressful. Having that being acknowledged to him helped him to cope with it in his own way. Stress is really tricky because if people don't want to deal with it, then they're not going to. You can't essentially force someone to deal with their stress or to use mindfulness strategies, because they're just not going to work unless you're on board with doing them. But I guess with guys in particular, just having that conversation, just putting it out there. And again, you don't need to ask the question every day because you don't want to sound like a broken record, but, just touching base once a week or pulling them aside from a task, if you do see they're starting to get stressed, just even having a chat about, what do you think happens when you get stressed, seeing if they can, using the activity sheets to see if they can identify what happens when they're feeling stressed. And again, we're not talking about this from a mental health perspective in regards to diagnosable conditions. We're just talking about general stress, which everyone experiences in varying levels, I think, most days in their life. So I think the most important things is being able to put it out there, and then helping them to identify what makes me stressed and what can help me to unwind. And like I say, mindfulness strategies aren't for everyone. Some people might find going for a walk around the block is a good way to unwind. And yeah, just finding what works for you, really.
All right, thank you, Tamika. And just last question, does IPAR provide these presentations for workplaces or go into workplaces?
Yeah, we sure do. So we do these presentations with workplaces. I find that they work really well in small groups. We normally do them with groups of between about 6 and 20 people. But I think if you have a group kind of a dozen people or less, they work best, because generally as we're going through them, we're asking the questions, getting everyone to have a chat about things, not necessarily in regards to themselves, but saying, can you tell me an example of what someone in your family does when they're stressed? And I find they're really helpful. Again, generally a lot of the info in these presentations isn't necessarily new info, but it's about keeping it relevant, about, you know, again, bringing it to the front of your mind of how can I manage my stress. So yeah, definitely we do these presentations all across Tasmania and also on the mainland, and yeah, we have a really good response from them in a workplace situation. And if you did want to speak to IPAR about getting one of these presentations organised in your workplace, my email address is tcarey, C-A-R-E-Y, @ipar.com.au. So you can feel free to flick an email through, and yeah, we can definitely forward some more information. We also do manual handling training and I guess physical kind of strong for life training as well.
All right, thank you very much, Tamika. And on that note, thank you for your presentation, your webinar this morning. Welcome to Healthy Mind. The mind does matter. So again, before everyone does leave today, there will be a short survey that pops up on your screen. We do appreciate you taking a few moments to provide us with your feedback about today's presentation and also your webinar experience. So on behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and our presenter today, Tamika Carey from IPAR, we thank you for joining us, and we hope that you have a great, safe and healthy rest of the day. Thank you, and thank you, Tamika.